So, folks, there is a man named Ezra Klein, and he works for the New York Times. He got his start as kind of a, wonky politics man with a blog, and worked his way up into the arms and auspices of the New York Times. He's one of the co-authors of the recent book that really fast-tracked abundance liberalism into the mainstream. Wasn't he the Vox guy too? Yes, he was also the Vox guy. And, well, I have a lot of problems with abundance liberalism. I really just view it fundamentally as a repackaging of neoliberalism, of the Clintonite approach to economics and politics. And I don't think that we're in a current time where our system can sustain that. I view it as essentially a ticking time bomb, effectively kicking the can farther down the road as our entire system slowly disintegrates. And so I'm not a huge fan of that book. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of Ezra Klein's work. However, I had to check out his latest Ezra Klein Show podcast, because in it, he interviews Sarah McBride. And number one, I haven't listened to a lot of Sarah McBride's takes. She is one of the only trans members of Congress. And, I thought, well, I've seen some of the takes and some of the posts on social media from her. But, let's hear her out. Maybe I'm being too harsh on this Ezra Klein guy. Maybe he has a really good podcast. Maybe it's just like he's really good at talking. And number one, I have listened to a decent portion of this. I'm just going to say that right up front. Number two, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, because my editor tells me our videos do a lot better when I ask you guys nicely to do that. So please, and thank you, help the channel to do well. And three, I forgot what this list was about, so we're just going to move on and jump right in. Here we go.
So Donald Trump, in his inauguration speech, was perfectly clear about what he intended to do.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
Starting the day of that speech, Trump launched an all-out effort to roll back trans rights, using every power the federal government had, and some that it may not have.
President Trump has signed the...
Okay, also, I was going to wait until later on in this to mention this. I really dislike how Ezra Klein talks. Every effort he makes to talk is essentially an attempt to just make it feel like what he's about to say is very momentous. And it's kind of insufferable. It's like you bottled the most insufferable parts of like the NPR radio voice and like jazzed it up to 1,000 and then put it into a podcast. And I dislike it very much.
An executive order which declares the U.S. government will no longer recognize the concept of gender identity.
President Trump directing the Secretary of Education to create a plan to cut funding for schools that teach what he calls gender ideology.
This afternoon, President Trump makes a move to ban transgender athletes from competing in women's sports.
Ban on gender-affirming care for transgender kids.
A ban on gender-affirming care for transgender inmates in federal prisons.
Ban on transgender troops serving in the military.
These executive orders, many of them have not actually gone into effect yet. But when I look across the country, we're already hearing the stories of impact.
It's a complete dehumanization of transgender people. It's about privacy and dignity for me to be able to change my passport to male.
It's going to come along with...
Which, by the way, a court ruled that transgender people are a protected class and can't be discriminated against for passport purposes, So that's pretty neat. Maybe consult a lawyer before getting into, putting a new application into that program, just because it's almost certainly going to be appealed. But it's nice to have a win on that,
Having to out myself to like Border Patrol agents.
We are begging to be allowed to continue our service, and you're just going to wash us away.
A lot of the things Trump is doing.
Oh, that's such a good observation, Paladin Lost. Ezra Klein functions in the same space people like Eric Weinberg or Jordan B. Peterson exist in. A person who seems like a really smart person to really dumb people. Yeah.
In this term have put him on the wrong side of public opinion. But not this. In a recent poll where Trump's approval rating was around 40%, 52% of Americans approved of how he's handling trans issues. And if you look more deeply into polling on trans rights, the public has swung right on virtually every policy you can poll.
Now, I'm just gonna, this is one of the fundamental issues at the heart of what they're about to talk about. And I want you all to ask yourselves, what happened between 2022 and 2025 that might have shifted opinions in a more conservative direction as it regards trans rights? What has happened? If you had to throw an idea out there, what do you guys think happened to create a conservative shift? Sports? It's a little bit of it. Heritage Foundation propaganda, Matt Walsh. There you go. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. What happened, and this is my take, is that Republicans noticed that trans athletes, trans high school sports participation was a wedge issue. I believe this was, by the way, identified by that same guy who did Christopher Rufo, who did critical race theory, who did got all the Republicans talking about CRT, critical race theory, got all the Republicans talking about trans girls in sports. And for the last several years now, it has been all talk about trans people has been rooted in this trans sport issue, right? And that has been milked to death by the conservative propaganda machine, right? So when I see these numbers, what I see is a shift born out of manufactured public opinion. And it's manufactured insofar as there's no real demand for this conversation outside of what billionaires and their propaganda outlets are creating. Billionaires burn their money day after day after day to manufacture swings like this. They evaporate their money into the ether, but they consider it worth it because they themselves can be, and some of them very much are, religious zealots who think trans people are an abomination, or they view it as a useful way to distract from the fact that they're going to get massive tax cuts, And so it's just, I see an immense amount of money, immense amount of political capital being used to funnel attention towards trans people. And I'm going to tell you right up front here, that is absolutely not the conclusion that Ezra Klein or Sarah McBride come to. So let's, with that being said, let's go right along here.
Banning trans medical care for minors, that's a majority issue now. A few years ago, it wasn't. Trump didn't just win the election. He and the movement and ideology behind him have been winning the argument. Sarah McBride is a freshman congresswoman from Delaware, where she was formerly a state senator. She is the first openly trans member of Congress, and her view is that the trans rights movement, and the left more broadly, has to grapple with why their strategy failed, how they lost not only power, but hearts and minds.
No, it's not something weird with this guy's voice. It's a deliberate affect. I can't do it. I use too many filler words because I babble in my shows. But it's a manufactured sense of import for you to just hang off his every word like he's the most fascinating man in the universe.
We have to grapple with the reality of where people are beyond this room or this city or my state. Meeting people where they are is not selling out. It's what this work is.
I was struck talking to McBride how much he was offering a theory that goes far beyond trans rights. What she's offering is a counter to the dominant political style that emerged as algorithmic social media collided with politics.
What she's doing is she's not just talking about trans issues, she's talking about style. It's just her approach to politics, man.
A style that is more about policing and pushing those who agree with you than it is about persuading those who don't. Sarah McBride, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to begin with some polling. So Pew asked the same set of questions in 2022 and 2025. And what it found was this collapse in, I would call it, persuasion. So they polled...
what I want to know is why are you having to say what I would call persuasion? Okay, but what would other people call it? Like you're claiming a collapse in persuasion. What would other people call that? What did Pew call it?
The popularity of protecting trans people from discrimination in jobs, housing, public spaces. That had lost 8 points in those 3 years. Requiring health insurance companies to cover gender transition lost 5 points. Requiring trans people to use bathrooms that match their biological sex gained 8 points. When you hear those results, what to you happened there?
By every objective metric, support for trans rights is worse now than it was 6 or 7 years ago. And that's not isolated to just trans issues. I think if you look across issues of gender right now, you have seen a regression, right? Marriage equality support is actually lower now than it was a couple of years ago in a recent poll. We also see a regression around support for whether women should have the same opportunities as men compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so there's a larger regression from a gender perspective that I think is impacting this regression on trans rights. But I think it has been more acute, more significant in the trans rights space. I think...
Oh, okay. Yes. To a degree, there's a whole manosphere thing happening for sure. There, a retreat to different conservative strongholds of identity. And that's a part of it, but it's like these are different issues, frankly. Trying to say, there's a large... I understand her point. I think these are different things.
Just candidly, I think we lost the art of persuasion. We lost the art of change making over the last couple of years.
Now, my question is, who does Sarah McBride mean when she says we? Does she mean Democrats? Does she mean trans people in general? Like, who does she mean?
We're not in this position because of trans people. There was a very clear, well-coordinated, well-funded effort to demonize trans people, to stake out positions on fertile ground for anti-trans politics, and to have those be the battlegrounds rather than some of the areas where there's more public support. We're not in this position because of the movement or the community, but clearly what we've been doing over the last several years has not been working to stave it off or continue the progress that we were making 8, 9, 10 years ago. And I think a lot of it can be traced to a false sense of security.
Can we also just talk, hey, 8 years ago, who was the president? Who might have had an awful lot to do with the way things have shifted if we're having to look back 8, 9, 10 years ago to when we were making real momentum? Almost like a conservative in the White House might have something to do with that. Almost like a gigantic cult of personality might have shifted things against trans people as a useful scapegoat politically.
That I think the LGBTQ movement and the progressive movement writ large began to feel in sort of the post-marriage world. I think there was a sense of cultural momentum that was sort of this unending cresting wave. I think there is this sense of sort of a cultural victory that lulled us into a false sense of security. And I think in many ways...
Again, I do want to know who she means a little bit better when she says us. Because I don't know that, like maybe like the, LGB people felt a false sense of security because like marriage rights had been secured. But like, I don't know any trans people who've been like, hell yeah, we were super secure back then. Like, I don't know. I feel like you'd have to be a fool after such a long campaign.
Shut down needed conversations. And I think, the support that we saw for trans rights in 2016, 2017, it was sort of a mirage of support in some ways. Because I think there was, in the post-marriage world, there was a transfer of support from the LGB to the T. I think for two reasons. One, I think people said, well, the T is part of the acronym, so I support gay people, so I'll support trans people. It's all the same movement. But two, I think in those early days after marriage, a lot of people regretted having been wrong on marriage in the 90s and in the 2000s. And they went, I didn't understand what it meant to be gay, and therefore I didn't support marriage. And I regret not supporting something because I didn't understand it. So I'm going to, without understanding, support trans rights because I don't want to make that same mistake again.
I don't disagree that there might be people who fall into that category, but like, I don't think that that's really the crux of what we're talking about, right? Like the entire premise here is a lot of very wealthy, powerful people paid a lot of money over a long period of time with the specific goal of achieving a target on the backs of trans people and our rights. And like, how is that analysis just completely absent? Yeah, like part of the issue is that the wider, exactly, Liliana Young, part of the issue is that the wider LGBTQ community, like, that was the end goal. Like, marriage equality was like the end goal for, a certain kind of lesbian, a certain type of gay, and like trans rights kind of just limped along. Still with some allies, of course, but like it wound up being that thing that was tokenified rather than codified into law. You had companies like touting trans people. You had, you had social groups touting trans people, but like trans people in general lacked a lot of these codified protection, and that was a problem. It turned out. So let's see where this goes.
And I think that resulted in a lot of us, a lot of our movement stopping the conversation and ceasing.
Yeah, but see, so when you say, I think she's referring to the Democratic Party, I thought so too, but then she's talking about the LGBTQ movement and she's saying us. And so I feel like she means us as in the LGBTQ activists community. I'm still murky on that,
Doing the hard work of opening hearts and changing minds and telling stories that over 20 years had shifted and deepened understanding on gay identities that allowed for marriage equality to be built.
No, she's a member of Congress, Mr. Miyagi.
On solid ground. And I think that allowed for the misinformation, the disinformation, that well-coordinated, well-funded campaign to really take advantage of that lack of understanding. And the support on trans rights was sort of a house built on sand.
I want to connect two things you said there, because I hadn't thought about this exactly before. So you made this point that there's been a generalized gender regression, which is true. And you also made this point that people had this metaphor in their minds that I was wrong about gay marriage. I didn't understand that experience. So maybe I'm wrong here too. But that one thing maybe that's different here is there's a set of narrow policies here, like non-discrimination, and then a broader cultural effort, right? Everybody should...
Like, the thing that bothers me a lot, and you'll see this increasingly as we get deeper into this conversation, right? One of the things they do is they talk about large groups of people, but then seem to be speaking to like a like an individual acting within that. So like they're talking about like movements of people in the aggregate across the entirety of the United States of America, or talking about frankly online posting behavior from like individual trans girls who are depressed and upset, and then seeming to take that as a statement on behalf of the whole of the trans community. And it's really weird. There's this nebulousness in this conversation that I found really hard to nail down while listening to it. And I found it fascinating rhetorically, but absolutely disgusting on like a moral basis. And frankly, I don't even know that you can accuse either of them of being ill-informed, but like the way they choose to present their framework is, I would consider a kind of betrayal to liberal values. It's consultant brain. It really kind of is, you know?
Put their pronouns in their bio or say them before they begin speaking at a meeting. It was more about destabilizing the gender binary. And there, people had a much stronger view. Like, I do know what it means. I've been a man all my life. I've been a woman all my life. How dare you tell me how I have to talk about myself or refer to myself? And that made the metaphor break.
If you know what a man is already, why are you being upset when someone asks you what a man is? You know, like, what do you mean? Like, if people were secure in these ideas, they wouldn't be getting upset about it. But the thing is, they keep talking about like imagined people. They keep talking about like, I can imagine someone being very upset that they have to learn new pronouns. I can imagine someone being very upset that someone hypothetically told them they couldn't refer to themselves in a certain way. Like, that's weird, right? Like, at no point did like doctors come into like a woman at the hospital and say, you can't call yourself a woman. You have to call yourself a person with a uterus. You're coming with us. We're the gender police.
Fucking pronouns.
And it's just like, this is all just imaginary. And it's weird that they treat the imaginary like it is concrete.
Because if the gay marriage fight was about what other people do, there was a dimension of this. It was about what you do and how you should see yourself or your kids or your society.
Yeah, I mean, how many of these people have their very own Baileys floating around in their head? You know, they just think about a hypothetical person and then they get aroused.
People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
That's right, Chuck Schumer.
I think that's an accurate reflection of sort of the overplaying of the hand in some ways, that we as a sort of coalition went to Trans 201, Trans 301, when people were still at a very much Trans 101 stage one. And then two, I think there were requests that people perceived as sort of cultural aggression, which then allowed the right to say, we're punishing trans people because of their actions rather than we're going after innocent bystanders.
Good night, Lady Ringcloud.
And I think some of the sort of cultural mores and norms that started to develop around inclusion of trans people were probably premature for a lot of people.
And like this is what gets me, right? The include like developing a framework for rules to include trans people was probably premature for a lot of people. And I reject that notion. I reject that you have to treat grown-ass people like they're goddamn children. I don't think you have to treat adults like they're babies. You know, like, I mean, like, how do I put this into words? To me, this is like saying, oh, we're desegregating too fast. You know, we need we took that, you know, the extra the blacks only fountain down a little prematurely, don't you think? For some people, like, that seems like a really weird argument to make, actually. No, I think you need to do inclusion. I don't think there's a way to slow roll it. And it's just really weird hearing this argument. It is deeply infantilizing. You know, I'm sorry, like, my 99-year-old grandmother can, like, understand trans issues and trans people, okay? She literally grew up during the Great Depression, and she understood trans issues, okay? You know, like I'm sorry, you don't have to treat people like they're children.
We became absolutists, not just on trans rights. I think
actually, can we I have a perfect clip.
First of all, I'd like to apologize to you people. I was invited here to give my support for Bill 401. I have very little knowledge of gay people and things like that there. So when I came here, my eyes were open. I was one of the critics that sat on the side and made the decisions there was only two genders. So I got an education that was unbelievable. And I don't know just exactly how to say this, but my perspective for people have changed. So I don't want to take up no more of your time. I'd like to apologize for being here, and I learned a very lot about this group of people.
You know, like when we're talking about like, oh, we instituted things too fast. No, we didn't. That man was able to sit in like a city council meeting over the course of like a couple hours, and he was like, "Oh wait, I get it now." Like Frank from Always Sunny watching Max dance. One of the best parts of Always Sunny. He gets it. And so I reject this notion that like, oh, well, you know, we moved too fast when it came to, you know, creating cultural norms and expectations around accepting trans people into society. We didn't move too fast. A man like in his 80s can like go to a city council meeting and come out completely changed by just hearing trans people talk about their experiences. That I'm sorry, that to me doesn't indicate people who've been indoctrinated beyond our reach. It doesn't indicate that we've lost on trans issues. It indicates that we're actually winning and very easily can win if we have the resources to match even a tiny fraction of the media messaging that conservatives put out every single day, shitting on trans people.
Across the sort of progressive movement, we became absolutist. And we forgot that in a democracy, we have to, one, grapple with where the public authentically is and actually engage with it.
And this is, I just want to stop here because this pissed me off a lot. Because as a politician, you have the power to help shape the story. You know, it's not just that you have to meet the public where they're at, but you also have to push them forward. You have to make the argument. You have to like have a spine and stand up for what you believe in. You know, if the story isn't you stood up for the rights of your constituents when you fight for trans rights, you need to do better. You need to do your job.
And I think, you know, we and part of this is fostered by social media. We sort of decided that we now have to say and fight for and push for every single perfect policy and cultural norm right now, regardless of whether the public is ready. And I think it.
I'm sorry. Can we just hear that again?
This is just the white moderate who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises to wait.
10,000% Paladin lost. The worst aspects of the white moderate liberal made manifest.
Fight for and push for every single perfect policy and cultural norm right now, regardless of whether the public is ready. And I think...
Yes, you should do that. Like, I don't know exactly how to articulate how angry that made me to hear that. Like, what? You want to push for perfect and good policy right now? Yes. I want to push for good policies right now. I want all my political leadership to fight for better policies than what we have right now. that's your job. Your job is to make things better. And it's infuriating. It's like, well, maybe you should push for dog shit if the public thinks dog shit is good for them. And it's just like, no, stop. No, you make the case for why a different course would be better. You shape the narrative. You make the case to your constituents. What do you think Republicans have been doing on trans rights for the last 10 years? You talked about how things have really gone downhill in the last 8 to 10 years. What do you think happened? Republicans came in, spent an ungodly amount of money after Chris Rufo pointed out that like trans girls in sports was polled well in a conservative way, and they spent an ungodly amount of money while Democrats said diddly shit about the constant attacks on trans people. Joe Biden just told us that he had our back, gave us a thumbs up, and then told us to fuck off. Like, I'm sorry. It's not like the Democrats have been doing a ton here to push back on billions of dollars worth of media messaging about how trans people are the devil, you know? It's so infuriating.
I think it misunderstands the role that politicians and, frankly, social movements have in maintaining proximity to public opinion, of walking people to a place. We should be ahead of public opinion, but we have to be within arm's reach. If we get too far out ahead, we lose our grip on public opinion and we can no longer bring it with us. And I think a lot of the conversations around sports and also...
Can we just take a look at this Smithsonian piece again? Even though he is revered today, MLK was widely disliked by the American public when he was killed. 75% of Americans disapproved of the civil rights leader as he spoke out against the Vietnam War and economic disparity. And again, it's according to a 1968 Harris poll, and he died one of the most hated men in America. And I'm sorry, but if your response to, some people don't like this policy, we only have 49% support now for trans rights. It's like, bitch, do better. Like, I'm sorry, do better. One day everyone will have always been against this, yeah. One day it will be unthinkable to a new generation of children that trans people were ever considered like lesser than.
So some of the sort of cultural changes that we saw in expected workplace behavior, et cetera, was the byproduct of maybe just getting too far out ahead and not actually engaging in the art of social change making.
And what I want to know so badly is when they say we got out too far ahead, what does that mean? No. Seriously, what does that mean? We're talking in vague generalities here. I want more specifics. Like when you say we got out too far ahead, what do you mean by that? You know, in a conversation where someone should ostensibly be asking follow-up questions, come on, Paladin, she's only a congresswoman, Paladin. She can't demonstrate leadership.
The position for more maximalist demands is one that you need to be in a hurry. Trans people are dying now, suffering now, and that there isn't time for decades of political organizing here.
Again, just the way he talks, it's like a constant this soundbite playing.
I am very proud of the mental horsepower you have.
Like it's every pause is, I just hear that play in my head between his words.
And also that maybe it works, or maybe there's a reason to believe it works. So you've been in more of those spaces than me. How would you describe how this sort of more maximalist approach and culture evolved and why?
Well, first off, I think you're right. It is understandable. I mean, this is a scary moment. I'm scared. As a trans person, I am scared. And I recognize that when the house is on fire, when there are attacks that are dangerous, very dangerous, that it can feel like we need to scream and we need to sound the alarm and we need everyone to be doing exactly that. I get that instinct. I understand it.
You know, I get the instinct, except that individual trans people are suffering and dying every day as a result of these policies, right? It's not just an instinct, that there's a very real suffering and desperation and fear that pervades the trans community right now. And, you know, there's a reason why, like, you know, you'll encounter this from some people on the left, but like just people are like, you have to have plans to escape the country, you know, if you can't afford to like drive, you know, figure out a hiking path. It's nuts. right now, if you're a trans person in America, okay, I don't know one trans person who hasn't thought about how they would try and get out of the country if they had to. And like, that's not, the instinct is I guess, born out of a very real desperation. It's not a tactic. It is people resorting to the only thing they've got left.
I understand that people would say, if you give a little bit here, they'll take a mile. We're not negotiating with the other side, though. In this moment, we have to negotiate with public opinion. And we shouldn't treat the public like they're Republican politicians. And when you recognize that distinction.
So this is my question. So now she's talking about we can't treat the public like they're Republican politicians. Who is we? You know, are we talking about the Democratic Party? Because I don't think that the Democratic Party writ large treats Republican voters like politicians. So again, the nebulousness of this conversation in the points that they make infuriates me.
I think it allows for a pragmatic approach that has the best, in my mind, the best possible chance of shifting public opinion as quickly as possible. It would be one thing if screaming about how dangerous this is right now had the effect of stopping these attacks, but it won't.
You call it a sort of abandonment of persuasion. Yes. Became true across a variety of issues for progressives, also for people on the right. And sometimes I wonder how much that reflected the movement of politics to these very unusually designed platforms of speech, where what you do really is not talk to people you disagree with. It's talk about people you disagree with to people you agree with, and then see whether or not they agree with what you said.
Oh, God, I can't.
Why does she always talk about negotiating with public opinion, like it's a thing that gets negotiated with? You shape or change public opinion. You can make deals with concepts. WTF?
Well, that's what I wanted to point out, Paladin, right? And thank you for the $10 dono. I appreciate you supporting the stream. Yeah, like the idea that you're negotiating with the aggregate of the public, you're not. If you're a political figure, you are shaping public opinion. You can inject stories. You can do talks. You can, I don't know, go on a podcast with some dipshit, I guess. And it's just, it seems to me that when you're talking about like negotiating with public opinion follows policy.
There seem to be an abundance of problems in this interview.
Yeah, I think we need to deregulate it. I think that will make it better. You know, if we deregulate Ezra Klein, his podcast will only get better. Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 5 tier 1 subs, very much appreciated. But it's. I don't know. You set better policies and the public catches up. You know, like when did Loving v. Virginia, 1967, public opinion, interracial marriage. So this is interesting, right? Here is a chart of public approval of mixed race marriages in the United States from 1958 to 2021. Now, Loving v. Virginia was 1967. And that is what allowed black and white people to get married.
Have we tried going fully? It's always sunny. And tried full deregulation?
Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 5 tier 1 subs. Also, I need like that starter ting of Always Sunny. You know, the starting like music as on my soundboard. Immigration stances is a good one to look into as well. I mean, I think this tells us basically everything we need, right? Like you went from having, you know, like 15% maybe support for mixed race marriage, and in the span of, you know, it took like 30 some odd years, well, maybe 30, let's say 33, 2000 for it to hit like 60%, 65%. It's crazy.
The more that dipshits go on and talk about moderating trans rights in the name of public opinion, the more the concept that we need to do that becomes public opinion. Sarah affirms her own suffering.
Exactly. Exactly. This is what's so infuriating, is that this very argument, the fact that, oh, well, we need to moderate on trans people. We need to, non-binary people. Yeah, they are too weird. Only trans men and women are the valid ones. Just throw the non-binary people under the bus, and that will surely work and appease, the conservatives that want to kill all of us. It really is that. But I just think that if you are making the argument that, like, oh, well, we need mixed race marriage to be popular before we can actually push for it, you would have waited from 1967 all the way to 2000 before you actually tried to improve things. And that's just unacceptable, And I do not know how you are a lawmaker and you arrive at this set of arguments, other than it is very convenient for the way you want to vote in Congress.
And there's a way in which I think that breeds very different habits in the people.
Sarah McBride would make a "Why I Left the Left" video the second it becomes slightly convenient. She already talks like a Republican.
I mean, I don't like critiquing trans people when everything that is currently happening around trans rights is happening, but I needed to talk about this after I started watching it because it makes me so mad. No fucking capitulation on this issue. Like, I'm sorry, but what our opposition demands of us is annihilation. And what we need to demand from our allies is for them to stand strong against that. It's not, we cannot simply go, okay, we'll allow a few of us to be annihilated. No, like, I'm sorry. Once they know they can get a few of us, they get all of us. That's how this works.
People who do it.
I think that that's absolutely right. I mean, again, we're not in this place because of our community or our movement, but clearly we aren't in this place because we weren't shaming people enough, because we weren't canceling people enough, because we weren't yelling at people enough, because we weren't denouncing anti-trans positions enough. I think the dynamic with social media is that the most outrageous, the most extreme, the most condemnatory content is what gets amplified the most. It's what gets liked and retweeted the most. And people mistake.
Yeah, maybe online extremism and the way media works really exacerbated this issue, huh?
Getting likes and retweets as a sign of effectiveness. And those are two fundamentally different things. And I think that whether it's
Sarah McBride is a neolib. I don't think she's a grifter. She just has bad ideas. Yeah, I don't know that she's a grifter either. I just don't think this is effective politics. I think that this is the politics of, a few savvy grifter types being able to transition into Republicans after the downslide. But like the rest of people who are sincere in their neoliberal beliefs, they just slide down into the muck of becoming like political consultants. And then like we never hear about them again.
Subconscious or even conscious rewarding of unproductive conversations has completely undermined the capacity for us as individuals or politically for us to have conversations that persuade, open people's hearts and minds, that meet them where they are.
I would love to know what she means by that. What kind of conversation do you think we should be having that we currently aren't? Like when you say a conversation to persuade, what do you mean by that? Like, how are you envisioning something different than what we have now happening? Like, do you want like a debate show? Is the solution in your world bring Crossfire back?
I understand that politics intrinsically is a pick-me contest, but what kind of goals will capitulation get you when they want you dead?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs.
And I think the other dynamic that we have with social media is that there's sort of two kinds of people on social media. The vast majority of people are doom scrollers. They just go on and they scroll their social media. 20% maybe are doom posters. 10% on the far right, 10% on the far left. The people who are so strident and angry that they're compelled to post. And that content gets elevated. But what that has resulted in for the 80% who are just doom scrollers is this false perception of reality. Take a person, let's say they're center left, and it gives them a false perception of everyone on the left believes this, and it pulls them that way. And then it gives them a false perception that everyone on the right believes the most extreme version of the right. And it creates this false binary extreme perception, availability bias, because all
I mean, in a sense, she is correct, because if you get all of your information and your takes off of like Twitter, it is going to be very extreme on there. But I also just want to say it is not equitable, right? Again, pretending, right, that you have, 10% of the extremist posters are on the left, 10% are on the right. It's not equitable. It's not even, especially when we're talking about like Twitter, or it's owned by a billionaire who made it specifically a Nazi echo chamber and like a white nationalist echo chamber. It's crazy on there. And to pretend like far left posters are in any way equivalent in systemic power to a billionaire, the wealthiest man on earth, and the way he's able to manipulate his social media platforms towards helping conservatives. Like, I just, it's weird. It's this entire thing, this entire conversation they're having is weird.
All of the content we're seeing is reflective of just the 20%. And it's warped our perception of reality. It's warped our perception of...
Oh, yeah. Also, this is why I tell you guys to go out and touch grass, okay? Because if you're spending all of your time doom scrolling on any website, it's going to fuck you up. Go touch some grass. Go look at some ducks. It'll do you good.
Who people are and where the public is. One of the best things about being an elected official is that I have to break out of that social media echo chamber, that social media extreme world, and interact everyday people. And you see, that's
okay. Liliana Young, I went into this, I was like, okay, so I'm getting kind of a vibe for how this show is going to go. When they're talking about leftist extremism, how long is it going to be until they talk about like neo pronouns ruining it for, the trans pronoun, like binary trans people, it's really like start the clock kind of thinking. I don't know about this.
There are real disagreements, but that 80% of the doom scrollers, or the people who aren't even on social media, are actually in a place where we can have a conversation with them.
When I ask this question, I don't just mean on trans issues, but you represent Delaware, which is a blue state, not Massachusetts blue, but blue. If you took your sense of what Democrats want or what the country wants from your experiences on social media versus your sense...
Oh, what are neopronouns? Neopronouns are like when someone's like, I identify as... I don't know. I identify as only my name, and but I also use zer pronouns or something like that. Basically people just make up their own pronouns. That's it. And in a lot of like neo-lib and conservative communities, you'll find people talking about like, all the pronouns, infinite pronouns now. It's really, really weird, It's not that hard to use different pronouns.
From traveling around your state, how would they differ?
I thought it was a right-wing straw man. No, there are actual people who, have neopronouns.
I think they would differ in two ways. One, they would differ in the issues that we would focus on, right? What you hear on social media is a preoccupation with sort of the most inflamed culture war issues that you almost never hear when you're out talking to voters in any part of the state. What you hear is a understandable catastrophizing around democracy, which you don't hear nearly as much when you're out talking to voters. What you hear when you're talking to voters is you hear about the cost of living. You hear about the bread and butter issues that are keeping people up at night, people who aren't on social media or aren't posting on social media. And so you hear a difference in priorities, but then you also hear a difference in approach. People are hungry for an approach that doesn't treat our fellow citizens as enemies, but rather treats our fellow citizens as neighbors, even if we disagree with them.
I mean, I think that where we're at right now is that people just want their, meat and potatoes issues taken care of. They want to be able to go to the grocery store. They want to be able to be able to continue driving their cars. They want to be able to, do X, Y, and Z. And that's why we need politicians that focus on, material issues, but also we need politicians that can do that while also fighting for civil rights.
An approach that's filled with grace. And I think on social media, we have come to this conclusion, rightfully so, that people's grace has been abused in our society, that the grace of marginalized people, the patience of marginalized people has been abused. And that is true. But on social media, the course correction to that has been to eliminate all grace from our politics.
So when we're talking about, but on social media, our approach has been to eliminate all grace from our politics. So what this really seems to be boiling down to is people on social media sure are mean, huh? And like, yeah, that's social media. And then this is about to take a turn that made me really also just infuriated because it's stupid.
It's how dare you have conversations with people who disagree with you? How dare you be willing to...
No one thinks that. No one thinks, oh, how dare you talk with someone who disagrees with... No one thinks that. What people do think is, oh, that person just sat down and talked with a well-known white nationalist neo-Nazi who Sieg Heiled once in 2014 and has since changed nothing about their rhetoric or political stances. And yeah, that's bad. That's not just like you talked with someone who disagrees with you, that you talked with someone who's like a white nationalist. And so I'm not saying Sarah McBride did that, but like, that's usually how these kinds of conversations go. You look into it and you're like, oh, wait a minute. They talked with a far-right extremist.
Work with people who disagree with you. How dare you compromise? How dare you seek to find common ground with Republicans? And I think when you go out into the real world, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, there is a hunger for some level of grace, for us to just not be so angry at one another. And
why can't you guys on social media be nice? Why can't you be nice to all of those people who disagree with you? Why can't you guys be nice? How will Cuck Hunter 6969 learn how to be better? You guys just need to be nice to him.
Miserable. They want to see and know that we actually do have more in common. And therefore, it gives you hope that persuasion is not only necessary, but can actually still be effective.
What does grace in politics mean to you?
I'm sorry, this just doesn't sound like a place someone comes to out of a genuine attempt to advocate for the issue. It sounds exactly how someone like Brianna Wu or Blair White would approach this.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Nine-Tailed Witch, thank you for the $5 dono.
When have you either seen it or experienced it?
I think grace in politics means, one, creating room for disagreement, assuming good.
If you guys could, if you trans girls could start being nicer to Elon Musk, we'd have him backing our Democratic primaries, no problem.
I'm sure the paleo conservatives waited for lower body hair to become more accepted before they kicked out the hairless from their ape no state.
Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. Oh, God. If you guys were just nicer to Elon, he'd be nicer to us. Don't you get it?
Good intentions, assuming that the people who are on the other side of an issue from you aren't automatically hateful, horrible people. I think it means...
But here's the thing. We don't automatically assume that. You know, like, I'm sorry. The 17-year-old anime cat girl on Twitter these days isn't making assumptions that people are being hateful. The people that, like, find her account and attack her are being hateful. The people who are like, oh, pronouns in bio, you're next, motherfucker. Like, they're the hatred is on our doorstep. We don't have to go and make assumptions about people because, you know, people who disagree with us come into our chat sometimes and just call us the F slur. You know, they just drop that T slur. You know, I don't need to make that assumption about anyone because, you know, they clear it up pretty quickly. God.
Creating some space for disagreement within your own coalition. I think it's a kindness that just feels so missing from our body politic and our national dialogue. And look,
What I find fascinating about this is that fundamentally it's just, we should all be nicer to each other with no framework whatsoever of how to actually do that. You know, part of the reason us trans people on the ground, we feel like we can't be nice to people is, one, just not true. Trans people are some of the sweetest individuals on the planet. But number two, not only is it not true, it's just, we don't make those assumptions. People just come at us constantly. You know, like, it's not, I don't know any trans people who are like, I'm never having any conversations about transness again. You know, like, I'm sorry, this is an imagined, like, Twitter poster. It's crazy.
I saw it in the Delaware State Senate on both sides of the aisle, whether it's in Republicans in Delaware joining.
Yeah, Republicans in the State House were really nice to me, guys.
On to be co-sponsors on an LGBTQ panic defense bill that I was the prime sponsor of, whether it was the discourse being much kinder and more civil on a whole host of even cultural war issues. I saw that grace have the effect of lowering the temperature, removing some of the incentives to go after.
Yeah, a Republican lawmaker came up and didn't immediately misgender me, and so I decided not to immediately respond with,
"Fuck you." We also
forget
trans guys, which tend to be almost incapable of being mean.
It's true, unless they're Buck Angel, but we don't talk about him. Socket Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs.
Vulnerable people in this country, in our state.
But I'm sorry, if somebody's coming up to you and being like, hey, I'm not going to vote to torpedo your trans panic defense bill that is trying to undo that as a legal loophole in our state. No sane person responds with just 6 middle fingers in their direction. That doesn't happen. The aggression is born out of individual interactions well outside of state houses.
I saw it with my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle who didn't vote for bills that were deeply personal to me, and yet we still found ways to work together. We still found ways to develop friendships. And look, I know that places more of a burden on me than it does on them, right? I know that when you're asking a marginalized person to extend grace in a conversation, you're asking much more of that marginalized person. Change making isn't always easy, and it's not always fair. And why would we expect that the extra burdens and barriers of marginalization would cease at the point of overcoming the marginalization, of creating the change necessary to eliminate prejudice and create equal opportunity in our society?
We don't? This is what if we imagine a person who's just wrong about everything? Yeah, wouldn't that be silly to be that person?
That's where the barriers are going to be greatest. That's where the burdens are going to be greatest.
It reminds me of a line that I hear it less now, but I used to see it a lot, which is, it's not my job to educate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought about that line because on one level, I understood it. I mean, it's probably not your job to educate anyone. And then if you're in politics, what you're trying to do is political change, I always found that line to be almost anti-political.
Yeah.
Right? That if what you want to do is change a law, change a society, change a heart, and you're the one who wants to do it, well, then whose job is it?
But the people who are saying it's not my job to educate you aren't people who are going out there as activists to educate people. The people who say it's not my job to educate you are randos. They're people minding their own business and being accosted by strangers. It's not my job to educate you. Yeah. I'm minding my business on the internet, and I've got shit I need to do. And it's just so weird, right? They're talking about some random internet poster and relying on their audience having seen a poster like that at some point and be like, yeah, people do exist like that. Except that it's not enough that people exist. You have to make the argument that there are actual serious politicians who are going up on stage saying it's not my job to educate you. That's not happening.
And who are you expecting to do it?
It's an understandable frustration. It's the only way forward. And look, I don't believe that every person from an underrepresented or an unrepresented community needs to always bear the brunt and burden of public education, right?
Thank God.
I don't believe that every LGBTQ person has to be out and sharing their story and doing all of that hard work. But for the folks who are willing to do it, we need to let them. And one of the problems we've had is that we've gone from, it's not my job as an individual person who's just trying to make it through the day to educate everyone, to no one from that community should educate. And frankly, no, we should just stop having this conversation, because the fact that we are having this conversation at all is hurtful and oppressive. And
where is this happening? Give me one citation.
It's not Betsy DeVos' job to educate you.
Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. But what is she even saying? She's saying that it went from people saying it's not my job to educate you to saying, let's just play it again.
To educate, trying to make it through the day to educate. We've gone from, it's not my job as an individual person who's just trying to make it through the day to educate everyone, to No one from that community should educate. And frankly, no, we should just stop having this conversation because the fact—
Who's saying that? I'm sorry, who is saying it's not the trans community's job to educate you? No one in the trans community should educate you. Like, what are you talking? Like, we're shunning? We're doing like a reverse shunning? I guess not a reverse. We're just doing a good old-fashioned shunning.
The fact that we are having this conversation at all is hurtful and oppressive. And maybe it is hurtful, but—
Like, give an example. What example are you talking about? Because like the only one that I can think of where trans people might react to that is like, hey, should we do conversion therapy on all trans people? And it's like, what? No. Even trying to open that line of questioning is hurtful and oppressive. I don't think we should. I don't think that's a good conversation to have. It's just very weird.
But you can't foster social change if you don't have a conversation. You can't change people if you exclude them. And I will just say, you can't have absolutism on the left or the right without authoritarianism.
She really thought she was cooking with that line. And you cannot have absolutism on the left or the right without authoritarianism. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? The absolutism on the left right now that is authoritarian would be what? Is it Juniper posting over on Blue Sky? Is that authoritarianism to these people now? On the one hand, you have Donald Trump and like a Republican majority in Congress, preparing to slit the throat of Medicaid and like, ignoring any kind of democratic checks and balances on their power. And on the other hand, you have Twitter and Blue Sky poster Juniper being sassy towards Elon Musk and Cenk Uygur, and that's also equally authoritarianism right there. Getting made fun of on Blue Sky, that's the strongest form of authoritarianism there is. Jesus.
Riverboat Jack is going to town. All the viewers gather around. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, gaming, plenty more. Her sense of fashion